As someone who loves movies, I've always paid attention to but have been slightly skeptical about film reviews. On one hand, part of what makes them so interesting is that they're highly subjective. We've seen critics not only disagreeing with themselves, but also with the audience in general, and that is completely okay, even encouraged. But where things begin to get a little bit muddy is the fact that film reviews can have a significant impact on the box office performance of a movie. So it comes as no surprise that the studios will do everything in their power to sway those opinions in their favor. Let's take for example David Manning, a film critic from a small weekly newspaper called the Richfield Press, who in the early 2000s was consistently praising every movie made by Sony. No matter how good or bad, they could always count on him to say something positive or basically provide them with a quote that they could use in the marketing campaign. Now, these days things work a little bit differently and we'll get to that, but back then quotes from critics were a really important part of a movie's promotion. They could help shape the audience perception and acted as a reassurance to the potential viewer that the movie is going to be worth their time and money. So naturally, the studios would feature those quotes front and center in trailers, posters, DVD covers, and all types of advertising.
Rolling Stone calls it a dream of a romantic comedy.
The Crew is the comedy caper of the year. Finally, a scary movie that delivers the goods.
Individual critics had a lot of power and influence back then, and since it was the early days of the internet, they were one of the few sources of word-of-mouth recommendation, which is really powerful in marketing. But how come David Manning just so happened to like everything made by Sony, even The Animal, a movie that was universally panned by all the other critics, yet one that he called another winner? Did they bribe him? Blackmail him? Send him the wrong movie and trick him into giving a good review? Or perhaps did they invent him? It turns out he was not a real person. The newspaper he was allegedly working at had never heard of him, and it was all created by one marketing executive as a convenient way to get the quotes they needed. Because for the most part, the studios didn't even care that much about the reviews themselves. What it was always about was the quotes. In an interview I found from 1999, one executive basically admits to that and says that we are in a soundbite culture. You just take the soundbite, and if they didn't say it exactly the way you want, you just make it up yourself anyways. It sounds crazy, but it's true, and the reason they could do that is because the Motion Picture Association did not have any formal rules regarding the accurate representation of quotes. The studios did have to submit all advertising campaigns for approval, but what they were being checked for were things like the tone and the content. So as long as it wasn't any blatant false advertising, they could get away with a lot. And boy did they push it. Something they would do a lot is shorten a quote, which would sound great by itself, but would be taken out of context. In 1995, for example, a critic wasn't too impressed with the movie Seven. He praised the opening scene of it, calling it a small masterpiece of dementia, but gave the movie itself a B-. Again, he was referring specifically and only to the opening scene, yet the quote that the studio went with was simply a small masterpiece, which made it sound like he meant the entire movie. Vanity Fair called it Blurbing when a review they did for Lost said it's the most confusing, asinine, ridiculous, yet somehow addictively awesome television show of all time, and later found out that the quote used in promotion simply said the most addictively awesome show of all time. You know, just removing unnecessary context. I mean, take a look at this poster from the movie Legend. You would assume that all of those are 4 stars, right? Wrong. The one in the middle is 2 stars. Which honestly, I have to admit is kinda smart, and even the author of the review himself gave them credit for that. But what if the studios wanted to use a genuine quote that was not misrepresented in any way? How could they still guarantee that they get a good one? As you can imagine, they had a few tricks for that as well. They would spend a part of the marketing budget to wine and dine critics, to fly them across the country to exclusive events and fancy screenings and get them to meet the cast who would schmooze them a little bit and hopefully entice them to give a little bit more positive review. In the same article, another executive says that even on a poorly reviewed film, you can find a critic somewhere that will absolutely have a quote for you to put in your advertising. They could just call smaller critics who are still early in their career and eager to get any recognition, let alone seeing their name on some poster and get them to say pretty much anything they wanted. That is not to say, however, that all critics were phonies. There were of course many respectable ones who could all collectively make or break a movie. But as the internet, and by extension aggregator websites like IMDb, Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes were becoming more widely accessible, the influence of the individual critic was slowly replaced with that of the overall score of a movie. Nowadays, the studios are using the coveted certified fresh in their marketing campaigns, and once again, they will do anything in their power to get that stamp of approval. One thing they can do is to be selective with who they allow to see the movie before it premieres, and try to cherry-pick the critics who they believe will give them the best reviews. For example, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania debuted with a 79% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 14 reviews. However, as soon as it premiered and more critics could see it, the score quickly fell down to well into the 40s, but at this point, a lot of people who might have been on the fence about watching it could have seen it based on that initial score. According to a recent study, 63% of the people who check reviews before watching a movie will not see it if the reviews are low, and that number is particularly important during the opening weekend. The studios simply don't want bad reviews to get in the way of the opening weekend box office performance, so what they will often do is enforce an embargo. What this basically means is that they will screen the movie to critics in advance, but not allow them to make those reviews public until a very specific time and date, which is usually right around the premiere. This can be especially helpful in protecting movies they don't expect to do well, and at this point we can almost tell how much faith a studio has in a project based on when they lift the embargo. Basically, try to sell as many tickets as possible before word gets around and people realize it's bad. In recent years, there's also been some controversy surrounding Rotten Tomatoes after an article from Vulture alleged that a film PR company had a network of critics that could be paid for positive reviews. It caused a big stir in the industry, and although Rotten Tomatoes acted promptly and deleted a lot of reviews and profiles, it made a lot of people question the legitimacy of the scores. In fairness, they have a clear code of conduct requiring journalistic integrity and not tolerating reviews based on a financial incentive, but again, you never know. There's also a phenomenon called review bombing, in which a bunch of people will flood a movie with negative reviews with fake accounts and bots for whatever reason, and IMDb, for example, has had to deal with that on multiple different occasions. Even directors like Martin Scorsese has criticized the modern state of reviews, and the narrative for decades has been that pretty much everyone with a blog can call themselves a critic, and I am a part of the problem. I mean, I have a YouTube channel about movies, and I made an entire video about why Airplane is the funniest movie ever made, to which you could either agree or choose to be wrong. But the point is, it is all subjective. And in fact, there are some really talented film critics out there who can genuinely help you see a movie in a different way, to help you understand it better, and to get you to see something that you end up loving purely based on their recommendation. As for me, just an idiot with a YouTube channel, I've been asked over the years to start reviewing movies, and I've been actually playing with the idea and trying to figure out how to do it my own way. So if this is something that you might be interested in, let me know in the comments below. Until then, check out this video that YouTube thinks you're gonna love, and see you in the next one.